Chapter 1 Mind, Behavior, and Psychological Science. Core Concepts 1. Psychology is a broad field with many specialties, but fundamentally, psychology is the science of behavior and mental processes. 2. 6 main viewpoints dominate modern psychology: the biological, cognitive, behavioral, whole person, developmental, and social-cultural perspectives, each of which grow out of radical new concepts about mind and behavior. 3. Psychologists, like all other scientists, use the scientific method to test their ideas empirically. After the kids had all that sugar, the cake, ice cream, punch, and candy, they were absolutely bouncing off the walls, said one of my friends, who was describing a birthday party for her 8-year-old daughter. I must have a skeptical look at my face because she stopped her story short and asked, "You don't believe it?" Then she added, "Your psychologists just don't believe in common sense, do you?" I responded that what people think of as common sense can be wrong, reminding her that common sense once held the earth was flat. Perhaps, I suggested, it might be wrong again, this time about the so-called sugar high people think they observe. It could have been just the excitement of the party, I added. Think they observe? My friend practically shouted, "Can you prove that sugar didn't make children hyperactive?" "No," I said, "science doesn't work that way. But what I can do," I ventured, "is perform an experiment to test the idea that sugar makes children hyper. Then we could see whether your claim passes or fails the test." My timing wasn't best for getting her involved in a discussion of scientific experiments, so let me pose the problem to you. Chapter Problem: How could psychology test the claim that sugar makes children hyperactive? We invite you to think about what we might set up such an experiment. We could, for example, give kids a high sugar drink and see what happens. But because people often see only what they expect to see, our expectations about sugar and hyperactivity could easily influence our observations. So, how could we design an experiment about sugar and hyperactivity that also accounts for our expectations? It's not an easy problem, but we will think it through together. And by the end of this chapter, you will have the tools you need to solve it. Every chapter in this book will begin with a problem such as this, a problem aimed at getting you actively involved in learning psychology and thinking critically about some important concepts in the chapter. Solving the problem with us, rather than just passively reading the words, will make the concepts more meaningful to you and more easily recommended, which we know is true thanks to research on the psychology of memory. The important concept illustrated by the sugar high problem is one of the most fundamental concepts in all of psychology, using the scientific method to explore the mind and behavior. But before we get into the details of the scientific method, let's clarify what we mean by the term psychology itself. Key question: what is psychology and what is it not? Core Concept 1.1: Psychology is a broad field with many specialties, but fundamentally, psychology is the science of behavior and mental processes. "I hope you won't psychoanalyze me," says the student at the office door. It's a frequent refrain and an occupational hazard for professors of psychology, but students need not worry about being psychoanalyzed for two reasons. First, not all psychologists diagnose and treat mental problems. In fact, those who do are actually in the minority among professors of psychology. Second, only a few psychologists are actually psychoanalysts. The term analysis refer to a highly specialized and relatively uncommon form of therapy. You will learn more about the distinction between psychologists and psychoanalysts later in the chapter. But in the meantime, don't fret that your professor will try to find something wrong with you. In fact, your professor is much more likely to be interested in helping you learn the material than in looking for signs of psychological disorder. So you might wonder, if psychology is not all about mental disorders and therapy, what is it all about? The term psychology comes from psyche, the ancient Greek word for mind, and the suffix ology, meaning a field of study. Literally, then psychology means the study of the mind. Most psychologists, however, use the broader definition given in the core concept for this section. Psychology is a broad field with many specialties, but fundamentally, psychology is the science of behavior and mental processes. One important point to note about this definition, psychology includes not only mental processes but also behaviors. In other words, psychology's domain covers internal mental processes that we observe only indirectly, such as thinking, feeling, and desiring, as well as external observable behaviors such as talking, smiling, and running. A second important part of our definition concerns the scientific component of psychology. In brief, the science of psychology is based on objective, verifiable evidence, not just the opinions of experts and authorities. As we often find in non-scientific fields, we will give a more complete explanation of the science of psychology later in this chapter. For now, though, let's take a closer look at what psychologists actually do.
By the end of this session, you will be able to 1. Describe the different specialties that comprise psychology. 2. Distinguish psychology from pseudo-psychology. Psychology, it's more than you think. Objective, describe the different specialties that comprise psychology. Psychology covers more territory than most people realize. As we have seen, not all psychologists are therapists. Many work in education, industry, sports, prisons, government, churches and temples, private practice, human relations, advertising, and the psychology departments of colleges and universities. Others work for engineering firms, consulting firms, and the other courts, both the judicial and the MBA variety. In these diverse settings, psychologists perform a wide range of tasks, including teaching, research, testing, and equipment design, as well as psychotherapy. In fact, psychology specialties are too numerous to cover them all here, but we can give you a taste of the field's diversity by first dividing psychology into 3 broad groups. 3 ways of doing psychology. Broadly speaking, psychologists cluster into 3 main categories. 1. Experimental psychologists. 2. Teachers of psychology. 3. Applied psychologists. Some overlap exists among these groups. However, because many psychologists take on multiple roles in their work. 1. Experimental psychologists, sometimes called research psychologists, constitute the smallest of the 3 groups. Nevertheless, they perform most of the research that creates new psychological knowledge. For example, an experimental psychologist would be well equipped to study the effects of sugar on hyperactivity in children, while some experimental psychologists can be found in industry or private research institutes. The majority work at a college or university where most also teach. 2. Teachers of psychology can be found at universities, 2-year and 4-year colleges, and high schools. Traditionally, universities and college teachers are also required to engage in research and publication, so they serve in a dual role as both teachers of psychology and experimental psychologists. At community colleges, teachers of psychology focus more exclusively on teaching, although some do conduct a limited amount of research as well, typically as a secondary pursuit. Teachers at high schools rarely, if ever, are required to conduct research. 3. Applied psychologists use the knowledge developed by experimental psychologists to tackle human problems of all kinds, such as toy or equipment design, criminal analysis, and psychological treatment. They work in a wide variety of places, ranging from schools, clinics, and social service agencies to factories, airports, hospitals, and casinos. All told, about 2/3 of the doctoral level psychologists in the United States work primarily as applied psychologists. Applied psychological specialties. Some of the most popular applied specialties include 1. Industrial and organizational psychologists, often called IO psychologists, specialize in personnel selection, talent management, and in tailoring the work environment to maximize both productivity and morale. One of the fastest growing fields of psychology, IO psychologists work for companies both large and small around the world. They may, for example, develop programs to motivate employees or to improve managers' leadership skills. IO psychologists also conduct market research, provide employee and management coaching, conduct employee satisfaction surveys, and help employees create a better balance between work and their personal lives. 2. Sports psychologists help athletes improve their performance by planning effective practice sections, enhancing motivation, and learning to control emotions under pressure. Some focus exclusively on professional athletes, and others work with recreational athletes. Still others work with individuals for whom physical activity is a key element of their job, such as firefighters or certain military personnel. In all of these cases, the goal of the psychologist is to help their clients maximize their performance by overcoming whatever psychological barriers may be present. Sports psychologists may also conduct research to better understand the relationship between psychology and performance. For example, studying how various types of personalities may increase interest in high-risk endeavors such as firefighting, parachuting, or scuba diving. 3. School psychologists are experts in teaching and learning. They deal with issues impacting learning, family or personnel crises, influencing school performance, or social conditions such as gangs, teen pregnancy, or substance abuse. They sometimes diagnose learning or behavioral problems and work with teachers, students, and parents to help students succeed in school. Many school psychologists work for school districts, which their work includes administrating, scoring, and interpreting psychological tests. 4. Clinical and counseling psychologists help people work through difficult choices in relationships, careers, or education to improve social and emotional adjustment. Almost half all doctoral level psychologists list clinical or counseling psychology as their specialty. 5. Forensic psychologists provide psychological expertise to the legal and judicial system. one of the most recently recognized specialties in psychology. Forensic psychology has gained rapid popularity due in part to such TV shows as Criminal Minds and CSI. And while a real day in the life of forensic psychologists may not be as glamorous or fast paced as their television counterparts, the field is burgeoning with opportunities. Forensic psychologists may test inmates in prisons or forensic hospitals to determine readiness for release or fitness to stand trial, evaluate testimony in cases of rape or child abuse, or help with jury selection. 6. Environmental psychologists aim to improve human interaction with our environment. They may, for example, study the impact of inner city garden spaces on children's academic performance or determine ways to encourage environmentally friendly behavior, such as recycling. In private practice, environmental psychologists sometimes help clients maintain their commitment to sustainability or conduct workshops teaching people the mental health benefits of interacting with nature. 7. Geropsychologists make up one of the newest fields of psychology, with the rapidly increasing population of adults over 65 in the U.S. The American Psychological Association established professional geropsychology to help older adults maintain their health and wellness and cope effectively with age-related challenges. Geropsychologists conduct assessments, provide interventions, and consult with families, caregivers, and medical professionals to help older adults maximize their potential in the later stage of life. Psychology is not psychiatry. Just as beginning psychology students may think all psychologists are clinical psychologists, they also may not know the distinction between psychology and psychiatry. So let's clear up the confusion, just in case you encounter a test question on the topic. Virtually all psychiatrists, but only some psychologists, treat mental disorders, and there are resemblance ends. Psychiatry is a medical specialty, not part of psychology at all. Psychiatrists hold MD, Doctor of Medicine degrees, and in addition have specialized training in the treatment of mental and behavioral problems, typically with drugs. Therefore, psychiatrists are licensed to prescribe medicines and perform other medical procedures. Consequently, psychiatrists tend to treat patients with more severe mental disorders and also to view patients from a medical perspective as persons with mental disease. By contrast, psychology is a much broader field that encompasses the whole range of human behavior and mental processes, from brain function to social interaction, and from mental well-being to mental disorder. For most psychologists, graduate training emphasizes research methods along with advanced study in a specialty, such as those listed earlier. Moreover, while psychologists usually hold doctoral degrees, their training is not usually medical training, and thus they are not generally licensed to prescribe medications. Recently, however, a few states have passed legislation to allow qualified psychologists to prescribe certain medications, subject to completing some advanced training and certification. In summary, then, psychologists work in a wide variety of fields, all of which view people from a psychological perspective. This perspective is illustrated by clinical and counseling psychologists, who are likely to view the people they are helping as clients rather than as patients. So now you know the psychiatry is not psychology. Next, we will look at something else that often gets confused with psychology. Zoo psychology.